The Birkin is not powerful because it is expensive. It is powerful because even money does not guarantee you can buy one. In almost every industry ever built, money is the mechanism. You identify what you want. You establish that you have sufficient funds, the transaction occurs, the object changes hands. That is how commerce works. That is the entire operating logic of retail on every level, in every category, in every country. The Birkin sits outside that logic. Not because it is without price. It has one. Not because the wealthy cannot afford it. Many can. But because the ability to pay has never been the only condition of access. And that distinction, the gap between being able to afford something and being permitted to have it, is the most important thing to understand about how this bag became what it is. The Birkin is not just a handbag, it is proof of access. This is the full story. Hermes was not born in the world of fashion. It was born in the world of horses. In 1837, Thierry Hermes opened a harness workshop in Paris. The business was precise and specialized, making bridles, saddles, and equestrian equipment for the aristocracy and the military. The horse was the central technology of the 19th century, the engine of transportation, warfare, and wealth. A craftsman who could work leather at the level required by a serious rider, who understood how a poorly made bridle could mean the difference between control and chaos on horseback, was not a luxury artisan in the decorative sense. He was a maker of things that had to work, without failure, under pressure. That origin matters. It is not background detail. It is the foundation of everything the brand became. The leather that went into Hermes harnesses was selected with a standard that most goods makers of the era did not apply. The stitching was done by hand using a technique called saddle stitch, a method in which two needles pass through each hole from opposite sides, creating a seam that does not unravel if a single thread breaks. When one stitch fails in a machine-sewn seam, the whole line can run. A saddle-stitched seam holds hole by hole, even when individual threads are damaged. This was not artistry for its own sake. It was engineering. Permanent, functional, load-bearing engineering expressed in leather and thread. That philosophy, that quality was not a finish but a structure, became the DNA of everything that followed. Hermes was not born in the world of fashion. It was born in the world of horses. In 1837, Thierry Hermes opened a harness workshop in Paris. The business was precise and specialized, making bridles, saddles, and equestrian equipment for the aristocracy and the military. The horse was the central technology of the 19th century, the engine of transportation, warfare, and wealth. A craftsman who could work leather at the level required by a serious rider, who understood how a poorly made bridle could mean the difference between control and chaos on horseback, was not a luxury artisan in the decorative sense. He was a maker of things that had to work, without failure, under pressure. That origin matters. It is not background detail. It is the foundation of everything the brand became. The leather that went into Hermes harnesses was selected with a standard that most goods makers of the era did not apply. The stitching was done by hand using a technique called saddle stitch, a method in which two needles pass through each hole from opposite sides, creating a seam that does not unravel if a single thread breaks. When one stitch fails in a machine-sewn seam, the whole line can run. A saddle-stitched seam holds, hole by hole, even when individual threads are damaged. This was not artistry for its own sake. It was engineering. Permanent, functional, load-bearing engineering expressed in leather and thread. That philosophy, that quality was not a finish but a structure, became the DNA of everything that followed. Through the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Hermes expanded. The harness business remained, but the world around it changed. The automobile began replacing the horse. The wealthy clientele who had come to Hermes for saddles now wanted luggage, gloves, watch straps, belts, objects that carried the same standard of craft into the new century. The brand followed its customers carefully, slowly, and without sacrificing the principle that had built its reputation. By the mid-20th century, Hermes was one of the most respected leather goods houses in France. Not the loudest, not the most visible, the most respected. There is a difference. Respected in the Hermes sense meant that the people who understood material quality, who could feel the difference between a good hide and an exceptional one, who had held enough leather objects to know what real craft felt like in their hands. Those people knew what the brand represented. It did not need to announce itself. Its clientele did not need it to. But something was coming that would change the scale of what the brand could be. The bag that would eventually be called the Birkin was introduced in the early 1980s. The cultural mythology around its origin is well known and widely told. What matters for this story is not the anecdote of how it came to be. What matters is what it became and why. The Birkin was designed to be a functional object, a structured leather bag with a secure closure, organized interior, and a construction that reflected the house's saddlery heritage. It was heavy. It was serious. It was not designed to be seasonal, not conceived to be replaced next year with a newer version, not conceived to follow trends, because the people who built it were not thinking about trends. They were thinking about longevity. A Hermes craftsperson, a singular artisan trained for years before being permitted to work on the final product, assembles a single bag over many hours. The leather is selected before cutting. The stitching is done by hand. The hardware is heavy metal, not hollow decoration. The object is intended to last decades, not years, decades. That specificity of intent communicates itself through the finished product in ways that are difficult to articulate but immediately felt when the bag is held. Weight, rigidity, the sound of the clasp, the quality of the thread. These are not luxury signals in a sense of decoration. They are evidence of a philosophy about what the object is supposed to be. Most brands grow by becoming easier to buy. Hermes did not follow that rule. As the Birkin's reputation grew to celebrity visibility, fashion media, the art world, the quiet testimonials of the women who owned one and carried it daily, demand expanded. The waiting and the selectivity around the purchase became part of what was known about the bag. The Birkin was not simply for sale in the way that other luxury goods were for sale. The experience of acquiring one was not a standard retail transaction, and this reality, whatever its precise internal mechanics at any given moment, became part of the cultural understanding of what the bag meant. The refusal became part of the product. This is not a small thing. In commercial culture, refusal is almost always failure. A store that turns away a willing buyer has, by conventional logic, made a mistake. Revenue refused is revenue lost. The entire infrastructure of modern retail is built around removing every possible obstacle between desire and purchase. Hermes built an obstacle, and then let the world discuss it. The psychology of controlled access is not complicated, but it is profound. When something is universally available, it carries the information of universal availability. Anyone can have it. The object communicates its own accessibility, and that accessibility is, in the end, a ceiling on the status it can confer. If you can walk into any store, present any major credit card, and leave with the symbol in a bag on your wrist, the symbol tells the world, this person had the money. That is a limited statement. But when acquiring a thing requires more than money, when it requires relationship, patience, access to a world with its own unwritten rules, the willingness to invest time in a transaction that may or may not succeed, the object communicates something larger. It says, this person belongs somewhere, was admitted, was recognized, was found to be the kind of person to whom this is offered. A Birkin does not say, I can afford this. It says, I was allowed into this world. Those are not the same sentence. The first is a financial statement. The second is a social one. And social statements carry more weight in certain registers than financial ones. Because money, in a world of sufficient wealth, is common. Access is not. The resale market confirmed what the primary market had created. Over time, the Birkin developed a reputation as an object that held and sometimes appreciated in value in ways that most consumer goods did not. Auction houses began selling them alongside fine art and rare watches. Financial publications ran comparisons between luxury goods and conventional investment vehicles. The bag became part of a conversation about value that extended far beyond fashion. This was not engineered by a marketing team. It was a consequence of structural forces, limited production, consistent demand, durable construction, and the status of the object in the global luxury hierarchy. When supply is controlled and desires amplified by cultural visibility, basic economics does the rest. But the investment conversation also did something beyond economics. It changed the register in which the bag was discussed. A Birkin was not something you bought and used and eventually replaced. It was something you acquired, kept, and in some cases passed forward. The language of investment applied to it, preservation, holding value, appreciating over time, is also the language of permanence. And permanence is the opposite of what the fashion industry normally sells. The signal became stronger every time the bag moved through another auction house room, every time it appeared on the arm of someone in the kind of photograph that lives forever in the archive of cultural memory. The Birkin's position in popular culture requires no detailed explanation because its position is total. It is one of the only consumer objects that has become a universal shorthand for a very specific kind of aspiration. Not mass aspiration, but rarefied aspiration. The kind that exists at the intersection of wealth, taste, access, and patience. It appears in film, in music, in visual art, in the language of social currency among people who have never touched one. It is referenced as shorthand by writers who need to convey a specific level of status without elaboration. That cultural reach is itself a product, the result of decades of controlled positioning, craft storytelling, and the discipline to resist the logic of scale. Most brands want more customers. The Birkin remains most powerful precisely because it does not expand to meet demand. It waits for demand to grow and grows more powerful for waiting. Hermes is not only selling leather, it is selling time. The hours spent by a craftsperson who trained for years to be trusted with this work. The time the leather spent being selected, cured, and prepared before a single stitch was placed. And, implicitly, the time the buyer spent in relationship with the brand before access was extended. That compression of time, the craft time, the waiting time, the relationship time, is what the orange box contains, not a bag. A record of all the time that preceded the bag becoming yours. This is the full story. From a harness workshop in 19th century Paris, built on the understanding that leather must hold under pressure, to the saddlery philosophy that became a standard for everything the house made, to the bag that the world wanted and discovered it could not simply walk in and buy, to the cultural mythology that grew in the space between wanting and having. The Birkin became the most desired bag in the world, not despite what it refused, but because of it. This is the Bag Archives.